stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving on to Russia and US and Cuba. Russia has strongly condemned the United States over its new sanctions against Cuba. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova has said that Washington's measures are illegitimate and put undue pressure on the Cuban government and its people. She has said that the U.S. strategy of maximum pressure is aimed at economically stifling the island of freedom. Zakharova has criticized the executive order issued by the White House on January 29th, calling it a violation of international law and the UN Charter. The Russian diplomat has emphasized the deep historical and economic ties between Russia and Cuba, calling their cooperation comprehensive and beneficial for both nations. She added that this partnership is not aimed against any third country and will continue to support international security and stability despite U.S. pressure. Now we welcome back Mr. Ben Aris. He's joining us live from Berlin. Thank you very much, Mr. Aris, for staying with us. Now, looking at this, can you tell us a little bit of history between Russia and Cuba's ties?
Well, it's very famous history, isn't it? It goes right back to 62, I think it was, when Khrushchev put missiles into Cuba and Kennedy reacted, and we had the famous Cuban Missile Crisis, where we nearly had a nuclear exchange between the US and the Soviet Union. In the end, Khrushchev backed off because of Kennedy's quote-unquote blockade and forced them to take the missiles out. But ever since then, following the Cuban Revolution that saw Fidel Castro come to power, the relationships have been awful. And since the same 62, the US has imposed sanctions on Cuba and has been keen to see the regime toppled. And that brings us right up to today. And now we have this new aggressive Monroe Doctrine, the updated Monroe Doctrine by Trump, which is basically the Western Hemisphere, including the Caribbean, belongs, quote unquote, to America. And they already did regime change in Venezuela and decapitated the government there by abducting, kidnapping the sitting president in a special military operation. And again, ironically, they have to call it a special military operation in the same way as Putin is calling his invasion of Ukraine a special military operation, because to invade is an act of war. And the argument here, a bit of legalese fluffing, is that if you call it a special military operation, that's not an act of war, and therefore it's quote unquote legal. And now that Venezuela is under US control de facto, they're turning their attention to Cuba, and everyone's very nervous because Trump set a new precedent. If you don't like the regime, in the old days, the CIA would go in and spend money and try to pervert the course of whatever elections they had. Now you just fly helicopters in and kidnap the guys you don't like and put them on trial in New York on trumped-up charges where have no jurisdiction. Yes. So there's references there in your report to the UN Charter, which guarantees the integrity of sovereign states, that you cannot just do what you like to another country. And also international law, which makes all of this illegal. And the sanctions, such as they are being imposed, these are nominally a tool to enforce international law, but international law has completely collapsed. Trump's made it perfectly plain that he's not going to pay any attention to international law whatsoever. He says the only defining factor for him is, quote unquote, my morality. In other words, whatever he wants to do. And Russia, ironically, is looking like the grown-up in the room, although it's guilty of invading Ukraine illegally. It's now pointing out that what Trump is doing is the same. It's the same game plan. It's like, do what you like and use your military to get what you want. And sanctions have become not a tool of international law, but a weapon you use against countries you don't like.
Right, and now that the United States has put new sanctions against Cuba, why do they not like Cuba? What's up with that?
It's a regime thing, isn't it? I mean, Fidel Castro is a rebel, a communist, and that doesn't fit with the right-wing politics of the States, and so they're having a go at Cuba, attacking it with sanctions. But ironically, the same logic extends with the U.S. relationship with Europe, which is nominally a partner, which is nominally democratic, but they've made it very clear that they don't like the parties, the left-leaning parties that dominate Europe, values-based, and that they are openly going to support the right-wing and far-right. So here in Germany, we have the AfD, which is a neo-fascist party to an effect, and Trump administration has said they're openly going to support and promote the AfD in Europe, despite the fact that Germans themselves are doing everything they can, the people, to keep the AfD out of power. And its popularity is rising because of the general dissatisfaction with the state of the economy and the Ukraine war, etc., etc. But Trump has openly declared to interfere in European politics, but not with helicopters, economic pressure and funding in the old school way of doing it. And in Cuba, there are much less restraints on the states, so they have all the options on the table, including an oil blockade, which is an act of war, including funding opposition, and ultimately including flying Black Hawk helicopters into Havana and trying to kidnap the president.
So now looking at sanctions once again, that Trump is using sanctions over whoever he doesn't like in particular. So how is that working out for US, and do you think that he can attain his goals by just putting sanctions and tariffs to achieve whatever he wants?
He thinks he can, and in the short term, he's probably working as far as he's concerned. Venezuela has the biggest reserves of oil in the world, 300 billion barrels, which is about 3 or 4 times more than what the US has. And the upshot within a week or two of the change of regime or the decapitation, there was a deal done with 50 million barrels of oil were sold by an American company and pocketed the money, which is nominally Venezuelans' money, but it's sitting in a bank in Qatar, and the Americans are controlling it, and now they're going to say, look, we're going to quote unquote help the country by making some of that money available for development. So in the short term, yes, it works. In the longer term, clearly Trump is massively undermining America's image, its credibility in the rest of the world. Everyone else is now rapidly trying to diversify away from any exposure to the states, and as a result of that, we're going to see trade deals, and we're seeing them already, like the EU trade deal with India. Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, is in Beijing at the moment doing a trade deal, and we're also going to see other consequences like the rapid de-dollarization of global trade, and that's already happening in Reserve Company. And so all of the key one, the really painful one, is countries like China are now rapidly selling down what US Treasury bills they hold. And that's going to be, in the longer term, a huge problem for the States because it won't be able to borrow. Yes. And it's got a massive $37 trillion debt. And if people stop buying its bonds, then the cost of that borrowing is going to go up. And that's going to not only cripple the American economy, it could bring it down. I mean, America is predicated on the fact that it can borrow so cheaply at infinitely low rates because everybody holds its T-bills. Yes. So the long-term consequences of this are very severe, but of course they're going to take a long time to play out. You can't sell T-bills off quickly, it's a question of years. But that process is already very clearly underway.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for highlighting that and shedding light on that, Mr. Aris. Thank you very much. Now, moving on to Middle East, according to